People think the Appalachians are forgiving because the hills roll instead of spike. That's a lie told by postcards. These mountains fold you into them, quietly, politely, and if you're not paying attention, they don't unfold. I'm a volunteer with a search and rescue team in southeastern West Virginia. We find the drunk, the stubborn, the unlucky, and sometimes we don't find anything at all. Last October, after 3 days of cold rain, I learned how a person can be standing on a trail everyone knows and still step into a place the map doesn't admit exists. I also learned why the shelter logs sometimes read like goodbyes. It started with a ping that didn't hold. A 911 call that opened long enough for the dispatcher to hear breathing, and a man say, "I can see the white blaze. No, two." And then it died. The number belonged to a 38-year-old named Daniel Clay, solo section hiking northbound, last text to his sister at 2:11 p.m. Camp at Laurel Knob Shelter tonight. All good. We staged at the trailhead with the usual mix of optimism and caffeine. Deputies in damp jackets, 2 K9 handlers, 4 of us from SAR, a Forest Service tech with a LiDAR tablet that hates rain, and a couple of locals who know every logging road because their grandfathers built them. Fog rode the ridgeline like it had paid for the seat. The laurel thickets held the rain and let it off you in cold coins. We split into pairs, and I drew the blue sector, south of the shelter, past a cut rock face where the CCC left drill holes like freckles. White blazes showed up on bark like good advice. The ground was a slurry of leaf mold and shale. You can tell fresh prints from old because the edges stand up before the rain eats them. We had a few crisp heel cups heading north and a drag scuff where someone tired clipped a root. "He's on the tread," my partner Clint said, "not a wanderer." Laurel Knob Shelter isn't much. 3 walls, a mouse that thinks it pays rent, a logbook in a ziplock under a flat rock. The book is where hikers confess to storms and ramen. On page 47, an entry from that morning. DC, 11:08. Rain quit, ridge quiet. White blaze turned left where it should go straight. Weird. Under it, a second hand, same initials, 11:12. No, I'm not alone. 2 of us. Clint raised an eyebrow. Funny guy. I didn't laugh. People don't do bits when they're cold. We grid searched 100 meters out from the shelter and called until the fog made our names damp. On the ridge, blazes are supposed to point you through. Straight equals straight. Double equals turn. 100 yards north, we found a double blaze hung wrong. Top one offset left like an arrow. Fresh paint. You can tell by the sheen even when it's wet. Forest Service swears they hadn't been up that week. We followed the left because that's what he would have done if he believed the paint. 30 yards in, the tread flattened into duff, and then nothing. No erosion line, no exposed roots, no sense of traffic. Just a corridor through laurel that existed for the next 50 feet and then knitted itself shut with branch tips. Inside the corridor, boot prints, 1 set, clean, medium lug, size, maybe 10.5. Daniel. At the end of the corridor, the prints stopped on a patch of moss that looked untroubled, except for a single oval where the toe should have sunk and didn't. We called, whistled 3 blasts. Something answered. A 4th blast, soft and exact, from deeper in, followed by the sound of a deer stand ladder creaking in wind. Except there was no wind. Radio checks. K-9 team had a start near the shelter and a loss in that same left corridor. Dogs don't understand left that shouldn't be there. We flagged it with tape and GPS'd the spot 3 times because electronics lie when they're wet and nervous. Every time the pin drifted 15 meters, like the ridge was shrugging. By the second day, the rain stopped being mean and started being patient. The Forest Service tech walked our corridor with the LiDAR slate and said, "This reads like a blowdown. Tunnel that never blew down." We found a can ahead. 7 river stones stacked on sandstone, top stone chalked with a narrow slash like a tally mark. Clint pointed at another 30 feet on, then another. "Breadcrumbs," he said. I didn't correct him. Real breadcrumbs would have been kinder. At the 3rd cairn, a scrap of orange paracord hung from a mountain laurel fork. It was cut clean, not torn. I recognized the brand, cheap Amazon packcord with a white tracer, because I've used the same to hang a bear bag when I don't want to lose good rope. The end was tied with a fisherman's knot, like a man who'd watched a video twice and got it right on the 2nd try. We followed cairns to a rock theme, where the ridge's spine opens into a slot barely wide enough for a person. It breathed, cold. Our radios fuzzed. I tossed a glow stick down. The green fell 10 feet, hit a shelf, and rolled out of sight. Clint said, "Nope," in a voice that included our training. "This is how you die. You commit to a narrow that has opinions." We backtracked to the shelter, and I read page 47 again. The second line, "No, I'm not alone." 2 of us looked wet, not rain wet, grease wet, like fingers had smudged it recently. I flipped forward and found a later entry dated wrong by a week. If you follow markers that weren't there yesterday, count backwards. No initials. Hikers do weird poetry, but not that kind. Day 3, we brought rope and a deputy who used to explore caves before he had twins. He rigged the slot with webbing and a top anchor you could trust with your own weight, and lowered a camera on a line. The screen showed rock, fern, a beer can skeleton, and on a ledge at shoulder height, a strip of duct tape with hair stuck in its glue. 30 feet in, the slot bellied and pinched into wetter dark. No place for a man to sleep or die without leaving bone. K9s gave us one more hit, halfway back to the main tread, then circled, then lay down like they were arguing with a smell that refused to be only one place. We spread a map on the Celta floor and compared every blaze photo to official positions. 2 doubles were wrong by just enough to convince a tired person to turn where no trail had been cut. Somebody had painted them recently. Somebody who knew what tired eyes look for. We canvassed the nearest holler. 2 trailers, 1 tar paper. Shack with a dog that apologized before it barked. An old man in a mountaineer's hat said ginseng thieves move blazes sometimes to push folks into areas they don't want seen. Or to pull them into the laurel if they're nosy, he added. and didn't meet my eyes. He pointed his chin at the shelter. "You check the log." I said we had. He said, "You check the box?" "The what?" He meant the old log box, a rusted tackle box under the floor that someone had nailed there in the 80s when pens froze. Clint pried it with a multi-tool. Inside, 2 golf pencils, a Ziploc of damp matches, a folded page torn from the current logbook. Page 47. The tear edges matched. On the torn page, a 3rd line we hadn't seen. "If you find this, put it back." That's where the official search ended. Not with a body, not with a proof of life, but with a sheet of paper that didn't want to be missing. Daniel Clay is still listed as not recovered. 3 weeks later, I got an envelope with no return. Inside, a trail register page photocopy, page 47, and a sticky note. 2 of us. The postmark was 2 towns over. I drove out and walked the corridor alone during daylight because stubborn is a cousin of grief. The double blaze had been sanded back to bog. The cans were kicked flat. In the slot, my glow stick had dried into a green smear that caught the sun and pretended to be alive. I don't tell people the woods eat you. I tell them the woods are old and polite and will let you pass if you respect the real markers. The I-1, slope, the drainages, the feel of tread under boot. Paint can lie. Rocks don't. If you ever see a double blaze offset left where the map says straight, stop and breathe. Count backwards. And if a shelter log says there are 2 when you are sure you are 1, don't argue with the page. Go back the way you know. I grew up along the North Carolina-Tennessee line, where the county names change faster than the creek names do. By 30, I'd put a lot of miles on old fire roads hiking alone, and by 32, I knew better. This happened 2 summers ago, during a wet spell that turned the forest to soup by noon and glass by evening. My friend Jared texted that he'd pitch his hammock at Panther Ledge, a rock outcrop that used to be on the map until the Park Service decided people loved falling from it too much. The legal way to get there now is don't, which means locals go at dusk and tell each other they'll be careful. Jared was a careful guy. He carried a whistle, a PLB he never activated, and a stupid hat that made boys in trucks yell Indiana Jones when he crossed town. He was supposed to check in by 9 p.m. When he didn't, I told myself he'd lost service. At 10:14, his sister texted me a screenshot of his last message. "Here singing down in the draw. Sounds like a hymn. One more photo then, back to camp." The photo showed a ghost of a trail and a light between trees that might have been a bug or a porch 2 ridges over. I drove the Jeep to the gate and hiked the rest by headlamp. The air smelled like wet rock and spice bush. On the way up, I passed the new sign zip-tied to a birch. Area closed. Hazardous conditions in a font that never stopped anyone. At the first switchback, a can of 3 flat stones had been topped with a cinnamon tin. Inside, a rolled scrap of paper. "If you're following me, stop." Jared's handwriting. The tin was dry in a way the night wasn't, like it had been under a coat until minute 10. At the ledge spur, the tread quit pretending to be official and turned to deer path. My throw of the whistle, 3 blasts, came back as 4. Soft. From down draw, and then as nothing. I called Jared's name. The 4th echo said it too, hushed, like it was learning my mouth. Some hollers do that, throw back your own name with extra shells on it. But this one never did before that night. His camp sat neat in the trees 10 minutes on. Hammock slung, top pitched, cook kit hung to dry. Phone in airplane mode because Jared. His boots were gone. His Crocs sat by the hammock like a welcome mat. The fire ring was cold. A view of the valley opened beyond camp, the kind of black that sells telescopes. I found a fresh set of bare prints leading toward the drawer. Toes spread, careful on the wet leaves. I'm not a tracker. I know the basics. Depth equals weight plus speed. These were shallow. He was moving slow, either curious or obedient to a song I couldn't hear anymore. I marked camp on Gaia, then followed with my whistle every 2 minutes. At a low saddle, the prints turned to boot tread again, a different pair. New lug, narrow, heel, probably a woman's or a guy with small feet. They came from the old logging grade, veering off to a spot nobody visits because snakes like it. The 2 sets ran parallel for 20 yards. Then the boot prints climbed a rotten stump and stepped off the other side into nothing, not walked out, stepped down into nothing, like a person got into a car. There is no road there. I stood with the stupid image of an elevator in the woods until a whip-poor-will decided I was ridiculous and told me so. I found the rope cut where Jared had hung his food bag, clean as a hardware demo. 10 yards farther, a riverstone sat on a stump with the No 4 chalked on it. We don't use chalk for CR out here. Rain embarrasses chalk. I left it alone. When I blew the whistle again, the 4th echo came from behind me this time. My stomach didn't like the math. I cut back toward camp. Halfway there, I caught a smell like a church basement and creek iron. A lantern flared 2 ridges over. Warm, old-fashioned, honey in the rain. I understood why Jared had taken one more photo. The smart thing about being older is you recognize your own curiosity like an old enemy and shake its hand from a distance. I put my head down and walked. Jared's camp looked the same, and wrong. Same tarp, wrong angle. In my headlamp, the hammock held a weight that wasn't. There before, then didn't. Under the tarp lay a wet page from the trail register at the closed shelter 2 miles away, in faint pencil. If you hear 4 where you blew 3, count back to the last blaze you trust. No initials. The shelter is padlocked. The last time I'd seen that log, it was chained to the wall with a tiny brass lock. I hiked out at dawn with the sheriff's deputy, who met me at the gate. SAR came in good and hard at noon and found what I had and more. The cinnamon tin plus 2 more tins further up, each with a note in Jared's hand, each drier than the rain allowed, each asking. Whoever followed to stop. The K9s went hot at camp, took the barefoot line to the saddle, then whined at the rotten stump and lay down. The PLB never pinged. His phone last spoke to a tower miles off the wrong way, the way radios sometimes error out when fog thinks it's funny. A week later, a retired miner hiking where he shouldn't found boot prints on a high bench. Narrow heel, fresh lug, leading to a vertical cut that smelled like cool breath. On the lip, a cinnamon tin without a lid. Inside, a wheat penny taped to the bottom, and a scrap of map with 4 tiny X's in blue. The miner brought it to the store where I work. I put it in a Ziploc, and I don't keep Ziplocs in my house anymore. We never found Jared. People said ginseng thieves, or a sinkhole, or a bad step. Those answers cover the tables at fundraisers and let mother sleep 3 hours instead of 2. I stopped night hiking alone. If I blow 3 and the forest gives me 4, I turn around exactly where my boot is. If you're ever in our hills and you see a fresh chalk number on river rock or a tin that feels drier than weather, leave it be. Some folks leave trails for us to follow home. Some are trails that take you somewhere that isn't home for anybody. People think a fire tower is just stairs and a view, but the old ones keep books, ledgers in metal boxers, where watchers wrote wind, smoke, and things that didn't fit on maps. I'm 35, seasonal maintenance for the state forest. And part of my job is hiking to the forgotten towers, checking bolts, swapping padlocks, and bringing the ledges down so archives can digitize them. Last June, on a wet week when the mountains smelled like cut cucumber and electricity, I unlocked Birch Top and learned why the last watcher wrote, "Do not come alone," 3 times on the final page. Birch Top sits above Yellow Creek, a blue shoulder of rock and laurel you reach by an old CCC grade stitched with water bars. The tower hasn't had a regular in 15 years. Some summers we open the cab for volunteers. Most we let the padlock keep its secrets. 3 months before my hike, a local 19-year-old, Leah Parrish, disappeared somewhere between Yellow Creek Road and the ridge. She was a strong kid, ran cross-country, carried a cheap inReach she had inactivated, loved taking photos of wildflowers with names longer than trails. Her sedan turned up at the lower lot. Her mother taped flies in windows until the tape turned white. I went up alone because the truck was dead, and because I meant to be quick. Swap the lock, take the ledger, photograph the stair stringers for rot. It had rained all night. Fog hung between trunks like gathered laundry. The first half-mile was easy reading. Wet boot prints headed up, wide heel, heavy step. Not fresh, but newer than the last ATV track. At the second switchback, I saw the first little crosses. 2 twigs tied with a strip of yellow survey flagging, laid on the tread like bookmarks. I've used flagging for line work. You tie it high on branches, not low on the ground. I stepped over them, but I noticed how clean the cut ends were. Somebody had scissors, not teeth. The tower legs came out of fog all at once, 4 black lines staked into rock. The cab is a 16 by 16 with windows boarded from the inside. The padlock was the old brass we meant to replace, and it bore fresh scratches like somebody had tried a key they wanted to work. I unlocked it, swung the hatch with the squeal you can smell, and climbed. The cab felt like a dry throat, dust, old paper, mouse pellets. The ledger sat where they all do, steel box under the desk, latch stiff with paint. I opened to the last page from the final staffed year, 1998, watched by Parker. He had tight letters and a habit of circling the word smoked as if to warn his future self not to be fooled. The last entry read, "No staffed season next year. Blazes moved along Yellow Creek. Do not come alone." The second line looked like he'd written it, paused, then pressed again. "Do not come alone." On the back of that page, in a different hand, bigger, slanted, half the pressure, someone had added a date from 3 days earlier and a note. "Blue Hat Girl passed here 10:22. Followed drift path west, singing." The cab was locked. The padlock showed no break. Whoever wrote that either had a key or a better reason than mine to be inside. I took photos of the page and radioed the district office. Static chewed the reply. I leaned out the cab window and caught the smell of wet hemlock and a faint, thin sound that could have been a creak or a voice under it. My phone grabbed a moment of service long enough to spit 2 old notifications and die. Going down, I found the drift path, what Parker meant. Not a trail, not even a game track, just a yellowed slice through last year's leaves that slid west off the grade toward a saddle. On a rhododendron fork sat a hat brim, sun-bleached blue, crown ripped away. I thought of Lee's Instagram, selfies with a blue cap turned backward, a joke with her coach about sunburn. I bagged it and marked the spot. 10 steps farther, a quoby black hair tie hung on a twig at eye level, stretched white with weather. Farther still, 3 stones made a small triangle on a knee-high stump with a penny in the middle. People build shrines to a lot of things out here. Sometimes they build them because they are lost and want to be found by the next person who reads cans like a language. The drift path narrowed until it stopped pretending and let Laurel knit over. The ground beyond was flat leaf litter with no tread, but a line of tiny scuffs. Pressure releases from careful steps continued into it, the way a deer prints when it knows a hunter is near. I blew my rescue whistle, 3 blasts. The ridge offered me 4, the 4th faint, and 2 perfectly spaced to be echo. It came from the left, where an old fire break I didn't remember cut down toward Yellow Creek. A strip of yellow flagging, new and shiny, hung there with its knots towards the holler instead of the trail. I backed up to the grade because training beats curiosity. On the way I saw shoe impressions I hadn't made. Narrow heel, new lug, turned slightly in like the wearer was pigeon-toed. Each print was set on top of wet leaves and didn't press much, like the person was light, or didn't fully belong to weight. They paralleled mine for 10 yards, then angled uphill to the tower's other leg. At the base, someone had drawn a tiny chalk arrow on the rock pointing under the structure. I crouched and found a weather cam, cheap action cam in a Verdepro, dry box lashed to angle iron with paracord. The memory card was gone. The battery was fresh. The paracord knot, double fisherman, was the same awkward right then left I teach rookies. Back in the cab, I photographed serials and called in again. This time, I reached a deputy, Jacob, who said he and SR had worked Leah's search hard and were still getting calls. "Don't poke alone," he said. "You above Yellow Creek? Stay on the grade." I told him about the ledger note with Blue Hat Girl. He went quiet. "Bring that book down," he said. "Right now." I packed. The ledger in my dry bag. On the first switchback, the yellow twig crosses were different. Arms a little longer, a strip added like a scarf. I didn't like that the forest helped with arts and crafts when I wasn't watching. The fog had thinned to the kind that makes sunlight look like an idea. At the second switchback, a cinnamon tin sat on the cut bank with its lid off. Inside was a folded photo printed on cheap paper. Leah in her blue hat, laughing at the camera, a white blaze behind her on bark. The blaze in the photo had a scar toward the left where someone had scraped paint. On the back of the paper, in pencil, 21 minutes from tower. No initials, no weather spots on ink. I smelled fresh toner. My mouth went dry in the way it does right before a ladder kicks. I didn't follow the drift. I walked out. At the lot, a Subaru sat with fog on the glass and a state volunteer sticker from a county 2 away. As I came off the trail, the driver, Delper, opened a crack, and a woman's voice asked, "You coming from Birch Top?" She had ranger hair, braid, practical, and a clipboard. She flashed a volunteer badge. I told her yes, and that I had a ledger for the office. She held out her hand like people do when they want weight. Something about the badge laminate looked bubbled. I kept the dry bag belt on my shoulder and said, "I'll take it in." She smiled without her eyes and looked past me into the trees when I used Leah's name. By the time I got my keys up, the Subaru had already rolled down the gravel, like the driver had decided not to be in that conversation. At the district office, Jacob took the ledger and the hat and the photo. He made the face good deputies make when they want to show you they are serious without showing you they're rattled. "We'll pull cams," he said. "We'll talk to archives, see who had access to that lock." He asked me to write exactly where I'd seen each twig cross. I drew a map and circled an area that felt stupid to circle. The open, obvious grade everyone walks. 2 days later, he called. The ledger showed no prints but mine and dust. Nobody with keys had been up in 6 months. They'd hiked to the tower the next morning and found the paracord on the leg, but no camera and no chalk arrow. A fresh double blaze on the grade 100 yards below was offset just enough to lean the next person into the drift path that shouldn't exist. He said they'd sanded it off. He said they'd sit on the lot for a few nights and talk to anyone who asked questions before saying hello. I went back on a clear day with 2 crew and a radio that didn't eat my words. We swapped the brass lock for a new one and logged the keys like church silver. On the way down, the twig crosses were gone. Where the cinnamon tin had sat, a penny lay heads up. I didn't touch it. I am not superstitious. I am employed and prefer to remain so. Leah is still not found. Her mother still tapes flyers, even when tape won't stick to wet windows. Birchtop's ledger now lives in a gray archival box in a dry room where ghosts don't read. If you hike our hills and see flagging placed like breadcrumbs instead of markers, remember flagging is for people who work lines, not for people who change them. Blazes should be square and honest. When a path looks like it wants you to be special, prefer the ugly tread that thousands of feet made true. And if you ever unlock a place that should have been empty and find a message dated after the lock went on, carry it out yourself. Do not come alone. The book was right. I didn't mean to be on Devil's Branch for the last mile. I meant to be home by dark, but the rain held off in the way that tricks you, and the hemlocks made a tunnel that felt like a promise. I'm a mail carrier weekdays and a berry hunter when the season's right. 2 summers ago, late August, a man from my route, Dennis Tate, 54, quiet, the kind who pays on the nose and returns Tupperware, went missing up that drainage while looking for chanterelles. 3 days of searching turned up a broken knife clip, a water bottle down in roots, and boot tread that ended on a slab of slate like a sentence that forgets its period. I was there for day 1 and day 2. Day 3 we got storms and were told to stay out. Day 4, the command trailer packed up. Day 5, I went back by myself because people like Dennis don't make noise in a crowd, and the forest doesn't either. Devil's Branch starts as a trickle under club moss and becomes steps of rock punching themselves into a creek. The old tram grade parallels it, the ghost of a railroad built to take trees out and leave stumps. I parked where the two met and walked with a stick to knock spider silt. The previous week's flagging still fluttered, neon pink with dates and initials of teams. I passed the stump where the dog had stood on hind legs and sniffed like he'd found a sentence that hung unfinished in the air. I passed the slate slab. The tread quit lying and turned to boulder hopping. It felt good to sweat for a reason that wasn't work. At the second cascade, someone had built a little altar. 3 stacked stones and a jar of creek water with a lid. A mylar ribbon tied to a twig, not saw work. The ribbon said, "Happy Birthday," in tiny silver. I left it. Beyond, the branch choked into a logjam of hemlock trunks laid like pickup sticks from a blow 2 winters back. The search teams had chainsawed a crawl hole. The hole now held cold breath, even though the day was hot. On the far side, the woods looked reset, bark clean where hands had scraped, moss revived where knees had pressed. I'm not a mystic. I saw weather and time doing chores. The boot tread we'd followed during the search had ended right here the first time. A heel on slate, no push-off, like Dennis had stepped into a canoe that wasn't there. I checked the edges for the 100th time and saw something I hadn't. 3 scratches on the rock, narrow, parallel, as if someone had drawn a small rake over wet chalk. The scratches pointed up a rib of ground between 2 drains where nobody walks because briars see you thinking about it and laugh. Somebody had cut a path with snips, a smart person width, not a deer width. Snips leave tails on stems if you're not careful. These tails were neat. I followed. The path rose to a knob with a ring of scrub oaks and a view of a far ridge wearing fog like a shawl. In the middle of the knob, someone had pushed stones into a figure 8. In the center of one loop lay a folded grocery list in Dennis's blocky print. Milk, screws, cat food, chanterelles. Wet but legible. No mildew stink yet. That was either fresh or had been kept dry and placed. I put it in a bag and told myself I'd turn around in 5 minutes. The snip path dropped the backside of the knob and became a contour hugging the hill. My boot knocked a glass bottle half buried under leaves. A brown Coke from the 80s with faded raised letters. Inside, a slip of paper with 3 numbers written in blue pen. 7, 9, 12. Lucky numbers, birthdays, or dates. Devils. Branch coughs up history every few steps. I kept the bottle in the pack because trash removal is a religion in this county. I whistled. 3 blasts. The answer came late and wrong. 4 echoes, the last one thin, like air moving through PVC. It came from the left, where the ground fell away into a cut littered with sawdust that should have been dissolved by 2 winters of rot. My stomach drew a tight circle and sat in it. I stayed on the contour. The path intersected a new skid road. Fresh bulldozer scars, no grass yet. Posted signs, stapled crooked, like someone didn't like letters. On a sapling by the junction hung a cheap trail cam. The SD card slot was open and empty. The latch smelled like machine oil. I'm not a thief, so I raised a hand to the lens and said, stupidly, "Hi, mailman." My voice sounded like someone else trying to be friendly. 100 yards on, I heard water talking in a way water doesn't. An airy hiss under the creek noise. It led to a sink, the start of a cast pocket, where surface water chooses to become underground. The opening was man-wide and leaf-lined. Footprints would fill the moment they were made. On the lip lay Dennis's broken knife clip, shiny where the search rain hadn't found it. The search teams had been close. We had walked past this crater 20 times and never heard the hiss because the branch had been high, angry, drowning everything else out. I lay on my belly and shone the light. 5 feet down the hole, dog-legged and breathed cool air up. Mud on the side bore a streak like a palm it slid. I yelled Dennis's name and listened to ground. The reply sounded like creek, then like wind and ductwork, then like a low note in a bottle. Something far away knocked once, then again, then stopped. I don't believe in tapping back. Caves make liars of hope. I marked the sink with orange, dropped a glow stick in case another set of eyes came soon, and backed out. On the way down, I passed 3 markers I hadn't. A scrap of bright blue tarp tied tight over a notch in a log so it made a mouth. A line of black zip ties cinched around a sapling at eye level, ends clipped neat, and a penny lodged on edge in a crack in rock like a tiny coin toss that never fell. None of that is SAR language. It's the language of people who want to return without carrying a map, or the language of people who want someone else to return a particular way. At the car, I called the county and gave the sink's coordinates, then sat there until a deputy showed and told him he needed to call the cave rescue team from over the state line. He did. They came 2 hours later with helmets and comm. They slid in, and were back out 15 minutes after with hands shaking in a quiet way. Tight dog leg to an air room and another pinch, one said, beyond my comfort. They brought up a scrap of flannel from a shirt sleeve caught on a root, and a gum wrapper from a brand Dennis always bought. The lieutenant said what lieutenants say when the county budget is thin and the PR is thinner. We'll regroup tomorrow. It rained that night, biblical. In the morning, the sink was a swirl of chocolate. No air, no sound but anger. The cave team left. The county went home. I walked back up and sat on the slate slab until the branch decided it had said enough. In a laurel crook beside me, a mylar ribbon turned over itself in slow, patient circles. Happy birthday, catching the mean. Sun that comes after storms. Dennis is still missing. Maybe he found a hole, and luck that didn't hole. Maybe a person with a skid row and a camera asked him for the wrong thing at the wrong time. Both are true enough to live with. I still hunt chanterelles, but I leave Devil's Branch to its own memory. If you go in after the rain, don't trust markers that look staged for your benefit. Pennies on edge, perfect zip ties, chalk where rain lives. Count real things, contours, drainages, the way your boots make sense of ground. And if you find a sink that breathes, don't test it alone, no matter how polite the air feels on your face. The last mile up there doesn't measure in distance. It measures in how small you're willing to be before the hill agrees to hand you back